welcome. Today the topic is living longer, and what I'm starting to realise is that the key to longevity is not in some single supplement or some magical exercise. There's so many processes that are happening inside of us, we're really complicated, so there's no single answer for such a complicated process like aging. So first, what even is longevity? Longevity's definition is found in the difference between lifespan and health span. Increasing our lifespan would be like living an extra 5 to 10 years. I guess you can think of it like increasing the length of the movie of your life. But increasing our health span means increasing the number of years of your life that you live in good health. You can think of it like the length of the movie that's worth watching, for example. So, in science, aging is broken down into 9 different hallmarks identified in this paper. So the first one that we should talk about is genomic instabilities. As we age, our DNA accumulates damage, both from internal processes like replication errors, reactive oxygen species, spontaneous chemical change, and external factors like UV radiation and toxins. But our cells are usually pretty good at repairing this damage, but as we age, the repair mechanisms get less effective. And this is due to a range of different reasons. For example, the repair mechanisms are actually encoded by the DNA, so repair mechanisms can be damaged by the same things that the DNA is damaged by. The regulation of these genes can also be affected. They can drift. Even the fuel that they run on, NAD+, can be depleted. Add to the fact that really damaged cells can release inflammatory molecules that can induce oxidative stress in neighboring cells. So the next hallmark that we're going to be talking about is telomere attrition. So when our cells replicate, the machinery that replicates the DNA can't fully replicate the entire length. It misses out just a little bit at the end, which is the end of the telomere of the chromosome. So you can think of telomeres like the ends of shoelaces or the aglets of shoelaces. So that gradually over time, the telomeres shorten and shorten and shorten. And this job of repairing the ends is usually done by this enzyme called telomerase. But telomerase is only found in certain types of cells like germ cells and some types of stem cells. And this can be bad for lots of different reasons, because the cells that don't have telomerase have shortening telomeres. And telomeres are used for preventing DNA damage, preserving stability, just like how aglets of shoelaces prevent the shoelaces from fraying. The next hallmark described in the paper is epigenetic alterations. So epigenetics, if you're not familiar, are chemical markers on our DNA that can act like an on or off switch or like a volume dial to control how much each gene is expressed. And with age, these chemical markers can become like noisy. Genes that are supposed to be on turn off, and genes that are supposed to be off turn on. And this could affect any gene. For example, imagine if your tumor suppressor genes just decided to turn off. I'm sure you can imagine what would happen there. And this change can also affect stem cells, so they might not behave like stem cells. Okay, now we'll talk about loss of proteostasis. So this is a long word, but it essentially means that the proteins that are made in your cells are usually looked after. They're folded correctly, repaired, or even recycled. And of course, with age, there's a loss of proteostasis, and this can mean that proteins that are made incorrectly. This is seen in lots of end-of-life diseases, where malformed proteins can clump together. For example, in Alzheimer's, the beta amyloid and tau tangles can form, as well as Parkinson's. Okay, next is deregulated nutrient sensing. This is one of the most interesting hallmarks to think about, for me anyway, because it connects straight to our diet, metabolism, and it can have the most interventions for longevity. So our cells have built-in nutrient sensing to detect energy and nutrient availability. From this, the cell can decide what it wants to do, like whether it wants to divide or whether it wants to wait and conserve its resources or even repair itself. And there are lots of interesting biochemical pathways to think about that are being affected here, and it explains the prevalence of their associated diseases that we see with age. For example, insulin signaling, mTOR stimulating protein synthesis, AMPK promoting repair, and sirtuins to regulate our metabolism. And so with age, the whole system is just falling apart. So the next one that we're going to talk about is mitochondrial dysfunction. So I hope you're familiar with mitochondria already, but of course mitochondria are the energy producing organelle in the cell. So simply as we age, the mitochondria produce less energy, and the mitochondria become less effective. We produce less ATP, which is our cellular energy currency. So lots of this damage is from reactive oxygen species that I mentioned earlier. They cause DNA damage too. And our young mitochondria are pretty good at repairing this damage. So reactive oxygen species, just to go into a little bit more detail, are formed when the chain that's used to make ATP, the cellular energy currency, becomes stressed, so that the electrons that are supposed to be moving down the chain end up building up, and instead of moving down the chain, they become leaky, so the electrons can escape and react with oxygen to form reactive oxygen species. So eventually, as this damage accumulates, defective mitochondria can accumulate within a cell, which can ruin the cell's function and end up causing lots of tissue damage, chronic inflammation, and many of the diseases that we see with aging. So the next hallmark that we're going to talk about is cellular senescence. So senescence is usually very useful for us. Our cells become senescent when they detect lots of damage to stop them dividing, but they don't die. It's triggered by lots of factors that we've spoken about already, for example, loss of DNA damage, really short telomeres, and cells can even become senescent when they detect cancer. So usually it's a protective mechanism, but with age, senescent cells can accumulate where the immune system doesn't clear them away, so they can accumulate. They continue to release lots of pro-inflammatory molecules that damage nearby cells and disrupt tissue function. And interestingly, senescence exists to prevent us from getting cancer, but if senescent cells linger for a long time, they can actually promote tumour growth in surrounding cells. So next we're going to talk about stem cell exhaustion. Stem cells are our reserve cells. They replenish our tissues when we need more cells, or they need repairing, or something like that. But we gradually use them all up, on top of them becoming less healthy themselves. For example, they might lose their ability to divide effectively, and even sometimes they adopt the wrong cell fates. This can weaken our tissue repair. For example, this means we can heal slower after injuries. It will mean we have weaker immunity, as hematopoietic stem cells produce fewer immune cells, and our organs can decline too, because they depend so highly on stem cells. And finally, altered intercellular communication. So what this means is our cells are constantly sending signals to each other to coordinate their growth, immunity, their metabolism, but you guessed it, with aging, this communication network becomes dysregulated. Senescent cells, I mentioned previously, send out toxic inflammatory signals, as well as immune cells sending out weaker signals to clear out infections. Hormone levels can change, and stem cells lose their supportive environment. And altogether, this creates chronic inflammation, ultimately to drive heart disease, dementia, and lots of other age-related conditions. So, by tackling all 9 of these hallmarks, we can extend both lifespan and health span. And in the following videos, I want to go into more detail about all 9 of these hallmarks and how we can tackle each one. So I'll talk about exactly how we can use science to live longer. So hopefully that's helpful, and thank you for watching.